Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and we are checking in with DORA, Colorado. That is the Department of Regulatory Agencies of Colorado. And I have in studio with me Rebecca Laurie, Director of Communications. How are you doing, Rebecca?
I'm doing fantastic. We were talking about weather and the springtime weather and how hot and cold it is
I
and
know.
unpredictable it is. And
Right? It's supposed to snow tomorrow. Today's 80 degrees.
yes,
It's all over the place, but 'tis April in Colorado.
that's right. And one of the things we're here to talk about is financial literacy, which also feels a little bit like hot and cold because I think a lot of us think we're pretty financially literate if we can balance our checkbook or keep track of our bills. But then we realize maybe we don't really know what's going on in our lives personally. Certainly if we're investing our money, that can be a hot and cold process.
Oh, yeah.
And just being up to speed on all the new developments that are happening
Yeah.
in the financial literacy and investment world. So we're very glad to have Jill Sarmo here with us today. Jill is somewhat of a regular as well,
Yeah.
as you know, because she is regularly out there talking to industry as well as consumer groups about financial issues. She is the education and outreach manager of the Division of Securities at DORA, and she works on financial protection issues. So she does that education and outreach regularly. Now, whether it's for your business or your family or for yourself, what we're here to talk about today is might as well take this time in the spring when we're going through kind of reevaluating everything for the season, your financial wellness. And so, welcome, Jill. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. And as we were talking about April, April is actually celebrated nationally as Financial Literacy Month. It's also known as Financial Capability Month, depending where you are. But those two things are kind of synonymous. And so I'm excited to be here, particularly in April, talking about this subject.
So, what is exactly financial literacy, and why is the idea of financial literacy and the practice of financial literacy really important?
Yeah, so basically the definition of financial literacy is that it's the capacity based on things like knowledge, skills, and also access to manage financial resources effectively. So this is something that, financial literacy we talk about should be kind of happening from cradle to grave. It is one of those things that you're never too young to start learning about money management, and we'll kind of talk about the ways that we can do that, particularly with young kiddos, and it's something that people really need to keep up with and kind of continue to learn about and grow and practice flexing those financial muscles all the way through old age and retirement. So it's a really good thing. And what we talk about when we talk about being financially capable is that individuals have to be able to understand and apply their financial knowledge. So we want to acquire healthy money habits. We want to make norms out of, kind of the routine, because that means that it becomes less something you have to constantly think about when it just becomes habit. And then we also want to develop the ability to stick with the plans that we make and to pursue the goals that we have for our finances. Because if you're not actively doing that, it's really easy for it to go by the wayside. Alex, you and I were just talking about, how, you can let a couple of years go by before you check back in on what your retirement accounts are doing. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot that I meant to, increase how much I was contributing. And, it's really something that you have to be active in.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept of being active in your financial literacy development versus passive. And I think a lot of us really do take somewhat of a passive role because it's a lot of work. But if you set up, as Jill was saying, some good healthy habits from the front end, which reinforcing that starting in childhood and going all the way through, there might be a better chance to be able to stay on top of those things. We're all probably, I don't want to use the word guilty because there's really no guilt associated with this, but I think we're all susceptible to falling by the wayside with our financial futures because our lives change, our situations change, and sometimes getting back in that routine, just like an exercise routine, is really difficult. So some of those factors that are beyond control. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so when we talk about financial literacy, we want to recognize the fact that there are always factors that are outside of people's control. So people lose their jobs, the economy takes a dive, sometimes family resources become depleted. So when we talk about people being prepared for some of those things that are sometimes outside of our control, there's actually some statistics that the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority put together a couple years ago. And in Colorado, they found that only 45% of Coloradans say they have any kind of rainy day fund. And so normally what we recommend for people to have is 3 months of an income. So 3 months of salary, that's what you want to have, in the case that you lose your job or you fall ill or you have a really major financial issue that you need to get, like your car breaks down and you have to buy a new car, things like that. But not even half of Coloradans have any sort of fund for that. They're literally living paycheck to paycheck. And so, while we recognize that people have trouble saving money because there are all these things that demand our time and our attention and our money, just little small ways that we can work on building things, even if it's, again, it's super cliche, but to just say, forego that Starbucks in the morning and put that into a savings account every day as opposed to, and make your coffee at home. It's just those little things we can do to sort of build up these emergency funds so that when things happen beyond our control, we're ready.
Starbucks even has their own brand at the grocery store.
That's right.
That you can make at home.
You can save a ton of money that way.
A diehard Starbucks fan, you can still have that.
There is one, we're going to go probably talking a little bit about some of the tools and resources, but just thinking about that, recognizing that there are tools out there that help you save unconsciously in a way that can really be beneficial. So I use the Acorns app. And there are several other types of apps out there that every time you do make a purchase, like at Starbucks, it will round up and take that and put it into savings.
That's great.
And I've had Acorns for a couple of years, and I've generated, a nice little pocket of savings. Certainly not 3 months
Sure.
of salary, but enough maybe for a quick emergency.
Right,
Like
my
a
car breaks
pet
down.
emergency,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
something
And
like
it's
that.
more than you had before. So
Yes,
Yep.
just from rounding up.
That's great. So, I think kind of moving into talking about things like money management and habits and stuff. So as I said, financial literacy is something that can start from, as young as in kids ages like 4 or 5 years old. And the way that we do that is, I think I found this, amazing study that I've been using to build my own financial literacy programs. And there was a study that was conducted by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So it's the CFPB, which is a federal agency. And they went and they conducted research in order to understand how to provide youth with these building blocks that then will carry through to adult life. And they kind of broke it out into 3 stages of childhood education. So the early childhood, which is literally from ages like 3 to like 8. Then middle childhood for those kids that are in like elementary and middle school. And then they broke down how to do financial literacy education for high schools. So this isn't only something that's useful for us in the education field or the outreach field, but this is something that families who have kids who want to start kind of thinking about ways that they can prepare their kids for money management, this is something that they can go and look at. So I would really recommend people to check that out on the CFPB site. You can just type in CFPB Financial Literacy and you'll find all of their tools. They're amazing. And what I loved about this study is that I'm a psychology nerd. I'm and just love the whole system of psychology, and their stages that they broke it down into with the CFPB actually mirrors the developmental stages of childhood in psychology. So there was a guy named Jean Piaget who broke down, you're familiar with him? Yes. Who broke down the childhood development. And so these tools that we're using for financial literacy can actually mirror how children develop. So the first one, which is what I was talking about with those early childhood, it's called the pre-operational, and this is when kids develop language, memory, imagination, things like that. And during that stage, what the CFPB recommends working with kids on is something called executive function. And so this is when they're building those little cognitive processes and beginning to make those connections. We can help them use, learn how to plan for the future. So talking about like, if a kid has something that they want, just even talking to them about like, oh, you really want that bicycle? Well, what can we do to help, us get to a point where we can get you that bicycle? Help us think of ways that we can save. And so, it's encouraging things like self-regulation with little kids, waiting, for that instant gratification, showing them that that's not always the best thing. It just really reinforcing perseverance and the importance of working hard for things. And then that prioritizing of future gains over present desires. And that's what they really talk about with that first stage of early childhood education. So very little to do with actual money or finance, but it's building those tools and that ability in kids.
And that is one of the more difficult things to do with kids, especially kids who might be on the autism spectrum or with ADHD. Executive functioning and executive planning tend to be really difficult for them. So working diligently on that very, very early, you have the best chances for the best outcomes, and that they can be able to not only organize their thinking, but then that translates into the way they organize what they need to do in their lives, which include being able to hold down a job, manage their money. All these life skills kind of fall back to basic executive functioning. It's really quite fascinating.
It is.
Yeah, and it's the same reason why, people talk about why preschool is so important for kids and why there's this huge push for universal preschool and free preschool education, is because that's the time when kids are really forming those abilities. And so if you don't have those to build off of, then, you do see adults who really have trouble with that executive function. And that affects every area of their life, including finances.
And so when we think about, well, why would the Department of Regulatory Agencies be thinking about this and at this level? But when you're working with adults who are filing complaints or have been fleeced out of everything they have or experience, frauds and scams, it's because those skills haven't been developed early enough, and those habits haven't been developed early enough. And so really it's a preventative measure.
It is, yeah, and it's not even just that they haven't formed it. It could just be that they haven't made that connection between that executive functioning and the money management piece. I mean, I think there's both sides of it. And so kind of showing people how to make those connections is really important.
Yeah, that is fascinating, and I love that you threw in some psychology here on that. I imagine that there's more levels for middle childhood and again high schoolers.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to my Piaget stages of development, the next kind of stage that we talk about is where people develop logical and methodical thinking. So kids they can think about things in terms of symbols as opposed to the concrete. They're more aware of the outside world and events. So again, going back to the CFPB study, what they found is that this middle childhood stage is where it's perfect to start developing those habits and those norms for money management. So it's where you introduce things like values and how those can align and correspond to financial goals. It's where you work on forming those kind of habits like saving and, saving in terms of building up for something that somebody may want. And then it's also where you can actually introduce rules. So rules for younger kids are a little bit tougher. They're starting to get it. But once kids are in middle childhood, you can really start working through a step-by-step process with them for building wealth, for building savings and things like that. And so we talk about at this stage something called financial socialization also, because kids at this age of development are learning about, they're starting to look outward as opposed to just kind of seeing themselves and being a little bit more egocentric. So kids are beginning to interact directly with money and also talking to their peers and friends about it. It's again the time that parents can really involve kids in some of their financial decisions. Say, should we go out to eat at a really expensive restaurant, or should we go out, or should we cook dinner at home tonight and then maybe we can go out for ice cream or something like that. So it's where you can really present those options for kids and help them kind of see outside and the bigger picture. So I think that's a really interesting stage. And then the final stage, which is for teenagers and kind of young adults, is based off of the idea that, once kids get to a certain level, they can really get into those really abstract concepts. They can make a hypotheses, they can do abstract concepts and relationships. That's why in high school we have to take algebra and we have to do all of those super abstract mathematical classes. But this is during the time that you can really develop that financial ability in kids. So, you know, they will analyze their options. They're able to execute those financial decisions on every level, from what kind of brand of shoes they want to, you know, buy to how they're going to save for college. And so those 3 levels, again, I encourage people to go check it out because it really breaks it down into this really kind of great, easy to use tool for both parents and educators alike for how to kind of start introducing these concepts to kids early on.
And one of the things that we were talking about before the program was the fact that while the stages of life are recognized within the school system and curriculum is developed around those stages, there's not a lot of financial based curriculum. Executive functioning is certainly, you know, part and parcel to it, but really instilling like financial habits is not a part of standard curriculum, which is really quite fascinating.
It is, and it's one of those areas that, you know I'm in the space. I'm working in financial outreach and trying to educate people on this stuff, but something that really frustrates me is that we don't have any sort of, especially in Colorado, you know, we don't have a standardized requirement. We don't have a requirement for schools to be providing financial literacy in the traditional sense. There are standards that govern things like what kind of math we teach, how we introduce students to the concepts of, you know, economics and things like that. But as far as an actual financial literacy program or something like that, we don't have any requirement. And so that's why government agencies, nonprofits, even private industry are kind of stepping in to try and fill the gap. But it's hard because there's a lot of us working in the space and it's hard to coordinate. And so I think, you know, something that families and parents can really help with is introducing that kind of thing in the home and then seeking out these programs for their kids where they exist, even if it's a weekend or, you know, a week program. Rebecca, I know your son went through one.
Yes, Young American Bank.
Yeah, Young Americans Bank.
I forget the name of the program.
But it's through Young Americans Bank.
Yes.
And they do, I think you said it was like a week long program that he went through where he learned how to, you know, manage money and save, and he learned about business and just kind of a really great introduction to these things for kids. And, you know, like I said, it's kind of unfortunate that we have to go outside of the classroom to seek these things out, but the value that is in that is so huge and it's so great.
I actually, a couple weeks ago, had a Junior Achievement Rocky Mountain in here. They partnered with TIAA, which is a financial institution. So again, that nonprofit and private business working together, and they have programs that they utilize all throughout Colorado, from kindergartners through high schoolers. And so they have these programs, and it's built, again, going back to this Piaget levels, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's built specifically for that, and they get to do a really cool, the 8th graders do a really cool thing where they go to like a town.
Yes.
On their
That's Young
own,
Ameritown.
Yeah.
Ameritown, thank you.
Yes. So they get to do that, and it's fascinating. We talked a little bit off air too about how hard it can be for your parents to talk with you about finances. But again, because we don't have that standard at school here, it's very important for these parents to get involved and get their kids rolling on this boat.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is that we do want to give these habits to our kids, but often we don't have them ourselves. And so sometimes we don't even recognize what to give. So we are looking for those experts, like Young Americans Bank, to be able to provide some structure, some knowledge that we didn't have growing up, to have these public-private partnerships and government agencies like DORA being involved in talking about it and working in a way that helps foster that conversation and that dialogue is really, really important. And also financial institutions, I think, are realizing these are our customers of tomorrow. The better aware they are of their financial futures, the better we're going to be as a business. So, you know, it seems to be a win-win when you really look at it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, kind of going back to where the standards are lacking, as of 2018, only 17 states had some sort of requirement for a personal finance class in high schools.
Wow.
And so that's really, it's not just Colorado, it's nationwide where we're kind of fighting an uphill battle. But what we need to realize is if we want to have a strong economy in the future, if we want to have capable people who can manage money and make good decisions and build, productive societies, these are tools that need to start early on. And so, it may take a little extra homework for parents to seek out the type of programs like Junior Achievement is putting on and like Young Ameritown, but the value is really there.
And that is one of the reasons why we've really stuck with our Take 5 to Get Wise campaign too, because that campaign in itself is to help remind adults that, just taking a few minutes to do some of that research and that knowledge seeking up front pays off in spades. And to be able to have that reminder like, just 5 minutes, or, I need to gain this knowledge or get a little wiser about something, it's not going to take that long. These tools and these resources are available to me. That's just right there important, knowing that you have the ability to go seek out the information and the correct information.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point with our Take 5 to Get Wise campaign. In addition to encouraging people to check out some of these online resources, DORA, our askdora.colorado.gov website, actually, if you go to the money page, it's broken up very similarly into life stages. So people can go to our page, our money page, and they'll see opportunities for youth education in financial literacy. They'll see the middle stage of life where they can plan for where people need to start actually saving for retirement and money management. And then there's that end stage of life after people have retired where they really need to look at holding on to their wealth, avoiding scams and frauds, all of those important things. So I would also encourage people to check that out because it's a great resource and we update it regularly in terms of new programs that we're finding out there, given all these great organizations that are out there doing this work, the proper credit. So.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received when it comes to finances was start saving yesterday.
Yeah.
Right, for
Yes.
retirement. So it's never too early to start doing that. And I want to learn a little bit more as far as adulthood and where we can go and what we can invest in and what we should avoid too investing in as well.
Yes, that's what we'll be addressing after the break, because as we mature, what we know is that certainly our financial interests become more complex and we start dipping into, really serious things like investing, retirement, things that really are vital to our lives.
Oh, absolutely. So unfortunately, we do have to take that quick break, but we'll be right back here on Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Check out DORA Colorado. You can find more information in the description below about all of these tools that we've given you. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I have DORA Colorado in studio with me. That is the Department of Regulatory Agencies, Rebecca Laurie, Director of Communications, and Jill Sarmo with the Division of Securities. And so in honor of April and Financial Literacy Month, which is nationally celebrated, we are talking about how to make Colorado a financially literate state. So fascinating conversation.
Yes, and in the previous statement or segment, we were talking about why it is so important to have skills built around financial literacy in childhood and how that bridges into adulthood. And Jill, if you can talk about that a little more, that would be great.
Yeah, so, one of the reasons why we talk about financial literacy being so important for kids, for young people, is because if we don't, have those building blocks early on, the effects can last into adulthood. A lot of us, as we were talking about offline, a lot of us who didn't have financial literacy programs when we were young are feeling like as we're adults, we're kind of playing catch up. We're trying to learn things that would have been really helpful to know and to learn about in high school, in college, in our early 20s. And so we see the very real effects of that in some of the national statistics as well as some of the statistics in Colorado about kind of how people are managing their money. And so in 2017, the FDIC did a report where they said that almost 7% of U.S. households, which is over 8 million people, are unbanked. So that means that nobody in the home has even a checking or a savings account. So these are people that are just, again, either they're living paycheck to the point where they don't have money to put into a bank, or they're putting it under their mattress like they did back in kind of the Depression era days. And that, when people are living that way, they're not building wealth. They're not finding those opportunities for saving. And so a further 19% of households nationwide are categorized as underbanked, which means that despite having one or more accounts with a financial institutes, these households are regularly relying on products from, payday lenders where they're paying these super high interest rates. They're using rent-to-own services. They're using pawn shop loans. And as part of all of that, even though those are legitimate, businesses in a lot of ways, and they're not doing anything illegal, they're taking advantage of the fact that people need to use them as emergency services to get money. And so, there's a very small line between services like that and people who then start falling for scams and frauds. And so we see that a recent survey found that seniors in particular, this is just like a horrifying statistic to me, is that people over the age of 55 in the U.S. lose upwards of $36 billion a year to things like financial and investment fraud, scams, as well as just exploitive practices by telemarketers who are constantly calling their houses, charities that are just hitting them up day after day after day. And so, that's the $36 billion figure is really scary to me. But something that last time we were here with the Better Business Bureau that Ezra talked about is that actually there was another recent study that came out, and Better Business Bureau followed up on this, that the millennial generation is not getting any better. We're not getting any better than our parents and grandparents. We're actually falling for more scams than seniors are.
Perhaps because they're more prevalent, or
I think just because people, again, were just not on guard for it. And with the internet and with all of the technology that's out there, there's just more access to losing our money. And so even though millennials, the dollar amount isn't as high, we're not getting any savvier. And so again, it's that just reinforcing that piece of like, if you just take some time to learn, if you take some time to look at your finances every month, review your bank statements and things like that, you can go a long ways towards protecting yourself.
I feel like I might be the only person that I check my bank account.
That's really good.
Literally, twice a day.
Is it
I gotta
growing
make
it?
sure I'm
Is it
on.
growing it?
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, maybe it's wishful thinking that there will be more in there. But yeah, for the most part, I tend to think that I have some good habits there, but I know that there's so many other habits that I need to work on.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I would say anecdotally from a lot of people I talk to, they're lucky if they check their bank account twice a month. So it's, and it's just one of those things that if you build it into your habits, if you know that, even if you're doing automatic bill pay to pay all your bills, if you say on the 15th of the month, I'm going to check in with my bank account, make sure that everything is being withdrawn correctly, all of those things, it can go a long way.
So what are some examples of other types of financial education that Division of Securities, other divisions at DORA, banking and financial services, are the other financial divisions at DORA? And I know that insurance and real estate and several others really have a stake in this game in terms of education and outreach on financial issues.
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question. And before the break, we talked about people checking out our Take 5 to Get Wise site, which can be accessed at askdora.colorado.gov. And if they go to the money section on that site, one of the programs they're going to see, and that we're happy to come out and present to people if they contact me, and they can contact me through that site, is for it's really for anybody between the ages of like 22 and 55, but particularly for people in those early money earning years, so between like 22 and 35, where you're just starting to figure out what you want to put away for retirement, figure out how to navigate all of these systems, figure out navigating investing, because I do this for a living and I still find it incredibly complicated and difficult. So one of the programs we have is called START, and it stands for Start Today and Retire Tomorrow. And this program is really great because it breaks down this time period of our peak earning years into 3 phases. So our early, middle, and late career, right? So we love 3 stages of things. We have it for childhood financial literacy. We also have it for our middle years where we're earning money and building wealth. And so the first phase focuses on setting those long-term goals. So again, those things that we hopefully learned as kids about how to set goals and stick to things. So it's talking about working to pay down debt. So a lot of us that came out of college with a ton of debt, how to pay that down, while also starting to kind of put some money away for retirement, put some money into investments, building our credit, beginning to save in small ways for the things that we want in our future. Phase 2 is then for that kind of middle career individual, people that are making those huge life purchases like buying a house, having kids, maybe getting married and joining their finances to somebody else. And it kind of moves into what we call the sandwich years. So you'll hear a lot about sandwich generation being people that as they're raising their own children, they're also starting to have to take care of their aging parents. And so that can put a lot of financial strain on households because if you've got parents who didn't save properly for retirement or who encountered health problems or things like that and they need money financially, while at the same time dealing with kids who are moving into adult life but still need financial assistance, that can put a lot of strain on people in those middle years where they're still trying to build their own wealth, they're still trying to save for their own retirement. So that's a really important stage. And then the third phase that we talk about is that pre-retirement phase, which when we talk about particularly investment fraud is the most dangerous for people. So people who are just approaching retirement start to worry that they haven't saved enough. They start to think that they need to play catch up, and so they start maybe looking for these opportunities to get rich quick, right? To make that money to sort of hit the ball out of the park with one single investment. And when people are in that sort of panic mode about, I really want to retire, but I don't know if I have enough to do it, along comes a scam artist who says, I have this can't miss investment opportunity. It's guaranteed. There's no risk. That plays into people's desire and really makes them vulnerable to fall for those kind of scams that attack people at that age.
And this really follows up to what we talked about last time, again, with the Better Business Bureau, whereas there's a bit of a right place, right time syndrome where very logical, educated people who normally would recognize the red flags of something like that are in a space in which, for whatever reason, in that moment, it seems to make sense to them. And it somewhat defies logic. And I talked about how that happened to me with an online purchase.
Yeah.
And Ezra had some examples, and so did Jill. So the fact is that when you are in that vulnerable space, it doesn't matter if you are, an expert in the field. Sometimes you are still very open and susceptible. So I believe, Jill, what you're referencing is how do you make sure that you aren't in that compromising position to begin with so that door is potentially open?
Right. And the way that you do that is by taking that time to continue reading about the ways to protect your money, the ways that they're, reading and trying to find out what the new scams out there are. To kind of throw a little shout out to one of our partners, the Attorney General's office, their consumer protection section. They have a program called Stop Fraud Colorado. We've been on here with them before. They release a quarterly newsletter. So it's not something that they spam people with, but you can sign up for it on their website. They release a quarterly newsletter where they talk about the most common scams, trends that they're seeing, things that people need to watch out for. I swear to God, that newsletter will not take you more than 5 minutes to read. So when we talk about our Take 5 to Get Wise messaging, once a quarter you get an email. It talks about all the things that you need to watch out for. And just having it at the forefront of your mind, no matter how competent you are, no matter how financially capable you are, just brushing up on things and having it come back from the back of your, your mind and your headspace into the forefront can go a long way of keeping people armed and, keep those preventative tools sharpened.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I say constantly to myself is if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
It is.
And I feel like a lot of scams can start that way too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and talking about that, we have programs for people who are in not just the building wealth stage that I talked about, but also the preserving wealth mode. So these are people who maybe have retired and that are still in that sort of vulnerable area where now they're living on a fixed income. They're trying to figure out how to make what they've saved last through the end of their life. And so a couple of the programs that we have that I really love, first is Outsmarting investment fraud. This one was put together by the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority as well as AARP. We partner with them on a lot of going out and presenting these programs. And again, always happy to come out to, community centers, retirement homes, anybody who feels like they have a community that needs to hear this message, we're happy to come out and present. But I love this program in particular because it gets back to that psychology aspect of things. It's the psychology behind why we make financial decisions. And not only that, but it's the tactics that fraudsters use that exploit people's weaknesses and exploit people's sort of psychological pitfalls. And so we talk about things like phantom riches, which is what I was talking about, where when you're maybe concerned about something that you want that you can't currently have or you can't currently afford, you're worried if you've saved enough for retirement, along comes the fraudster who says, I can promise you if you invest with me that you'll have enough money to live on for the rest of your life. And that just flips off the rational part of our thinking because it just delves into something that we deeply want. It's that desire. Mm-hmm. So it talks about all of those persuasion tactics that fraudsters use and that we need to know about in order to properly arm ourselves against.
Yeah.
You had something.
No. I wanted to talk a little bit more about some habits. Creating, because obviously being vigilant and knowing to look out for these is important. But building this financial habit muscle, so to speak. I know that sometimes we get into a habit, and because we do that habit so much, we take it for granted and we start making mistakes. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if there's anywhere that actually happens.
Yeah, so I think another thing that I love what this program talks about and educates people on is something called the Illusion of Invulnerability, which I think plays into what you're talking about. So it's that idea that, especially for people who are in the later years of life, they've been managing finances for so long. They've been, checking their bank statements and paying bills and all of those things that they sort of get into this lull and this space where it's just on autopilot. And when you're on autopilot, you kind of start to think that there's no risk to you. You're not going to fall for a scam. You've gone this long without getting taken. You probably know what you're talking about. You probably know how to spot a con artist. And it's kind of when people get into that feeling of safety, that feeling of normalcy, that habit space, which as good as those habits are to have, right, it gives you that illusion of invulnerability. So, when I present the program, one thing I love is I have this little comic, and it's of a little worm that's coming out of the ground, and he's giving this pronouncement that he says, "They say my senses are so keen I can sense an earthquake before it happens." And behind him, there's a bird that's about to eat him.
Right.
And it's this idea that, we get to this point where we think, you know what, I've got it figured out. I'm at that point in life where I'm doing pretty good. I've got it figured out. And so I can spot something coming a mile away. And it's those people who have that confidence and who aren't consistently trying to build that muscle back up and maintain it that kind of get into that kind of dangerous space.
And so you talk about the 3 R's of financial decision making. What is that?
Yeah, so that's, again, I don't know why, but we have this trend of threes. It's so easy.
Well, comedy's in threes as well. So
that's right.
It's very fun.
It's just natural. It feels very natural. But when we're talking to people about, again, people who know how to manage their finances, they feel like they're fairly financially literate, there are still 3 R's that they need to check in with themselves before they make a financial decision. And it's just really easy to remember. So when I present this, I always say, when you're young, you have the 3 R's, which are reading, writing, and arithmetic, which never made sense to me because they don't all start with R.
No.
But
That's
when
an
we
A.
when we created
Sorry.
when we created the 3 R's of financial decision making, we purposefully used things that started with R. And we have recognize, research, and report. So for adults, this is really important anytime you're going to make a financial decision, but especially when you're making a financial decision on something like an investment, where potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars are at stake, or your retirement funds, your retirement account, your IRA, if you're trying to figure out what to do with it after you retire. So the first is recognize. This is where we talk about knowing the risk factors behind people who fall for financial scams and frauds. So again, people who don't do their homework, people who don't look up a financial advisor to make sure they're licensed and that their license is in good standing. The second one is what I talked about. It's that emotional and psychological piece. It's those motivations that we have, the reasons why we make financial decisions, and then the things that also make us susceptible to the persuasion tactics that con artists use. And so these are the things that kind of lie behind both our best and our worst financial decisions. So learning about those things and being able to recognize them is really important. The second piece we talk about is that research piece. It's not enough to just know these things or to have somebody tell them to you. You need to do the legwork, follow up, do your due diligence, research, and make sure that what you've heard is true. So we talk about with the investment space, checking out your financial advisor, checking out an offering that's being given to you, making sure that it's all legitimate, that it's done by a properly licensed individual, going to brokercheck.org or investor.gov, which are the two best websites that you can go to. It takes 5 minutes to check out your financial advisor. And then the third thing is to report. So, we know from statistics from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit that only 1 in 44 cases of financial fraud ever actually make it to authorities. And that's an estimate. That's what we're guessing because most of them we don't hear about. So for whatever reason, whether people are embarrassed, whether they don't realize they've been scammed, for whatever reason, people don't report financial crimes. It's one of the most underreported crimes. And so why we included that in the 3 R's is that it's really important to know where to seek help, and that if you need help, to let authorities know so that we can come in and help you. And it's not just so that people can maybe recover something from themselves if they've lost money, but also that they can help prevent it from happening to other people. Because again, as people who work in the regulatory authority, law enforcement, adult protective services, we can't prevent something from happening to other people unless we know about it. So if you suspect that something doesn't feel right, if you have that gut feeling, or if you know that you've been scammed or taken advantage of, we really try to reinforce how important it is to report those things.
Going back to the idea of recognize, very briefly, we've talked about a woman named Lois who is in her 80s and was a very vocal person, even did PSAs and other interviews on behalf of DORA, but really on behalf of all seniors and people who are in this stage where they feel like they have their money and they're really just looking to grow it and secure it. And the concept that Jill also brought up last time was this concept of social consensus and how susceptible all of us are to social consensus. Cryptocurrency, I think, is a good example of that. Everyone's doing it. There's a social consensus that this is the way you can make some money, so everyone kind of hops on that bandwagon. One of those things, as we know and we've talked about a lot, is this idea of affinity investments. Your church, your social group, everyone, a family member brings an opportunity and those red flags are muted for whatever reason. You don't do the proper checks because you think, it's my cousin who brought this to me. My cousin knows these people, or
and that's what it was for Lois.
And so going back to Lois's situation, yep. Yes, both her and her husband got into a can't lose sort of real estate transaction, which just is more common than anyone realizes. I think you had a statistic here that it's like up 70% for people in Lois's age range. 70% of investment fraud victims made an investment purely based on advice from a relative or friend.
Yep, that's exactly right, and without doing any other check.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, in Lois's case, I believe it was her husband's cousin who came and said, her husband had been having health problems. So again, there's that panic that's setting in. It's that priming you emotionally for a scam. So her husband was having health problems. They were worried about making their money last. His cousin approached them and said, I know these guys who can, make your money grow. And they didn't question it because they trusted the cousin. I hate to tell people don't trust even your family members, but when it comes to something like the $500,000 plus that they ended up investing and sinking into this bad investment deal, don't trust your family members. It's one of those things that it's it pays to do that extra quick check, whether you're calling us, if you don't want to use the computer and you're uncomfortable using the internet, for older people, call the Division of Securities. We will run the check for you. We can let you know if they're properly licensed and if it's a legitimate deal.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I love hearing that. In these last few minutes here, I know that we have mentioned take five to get wise.
Yes.
I almost said it backwards. Take wise to get five. But take 5 to get wise. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about that. I know we've mentioned it. It's a really cool program, but what's it for? Why do I need to visit?
So I'll let Rebecca just get started with the broad program.
Sure. So again, going back to the mission of DORA, which is consumer protection, the whole idea is that if people have some preventative tools and reminders that it takes just a few minutes to be able to access and resource those tools and be given very clear direction to where they can get those tools, that there's a much better chance for both the consumer to not fall into trouble in terms of their choices with who they give their business to, but it also serves as a way for industry to feel confident that they are getting smart consumers at their door, and that there are businesses out there. The majority of businesses are serving their consumers right. So that was the concept of Take 5 to Get Wise, is to be this information resource for consumers. What we've really found is that some topics in particular are really salient to that very concept, and that's where it comes into the financial literacy and financial side of this topic, because it affects everyone. Money affects everyone, and financial literacy, we have found it even once you get to the point of knowing how to take advantage of resources and tools, you have to have the financial literacy, that foundation, to even think, I need to do some research. I need to take some steps to get informed. And so that is really why Jill is out there talking to all different kinds of groups regarding these financial literacy foundations that are required not only in childhood, but then really building those good habits in adulthood.
Yeah, I think when I go out and give these presentations, I'm always really transparent about the fact that I'm still learning. I'm an expert in a lot of things, but my God, there's a lot out there when it comes to finance that I'm still learning about, and that, again, it's that continual process, because with new technologies and everything like that, we all have to be in this together. We all have to work together. But I always tell people that even when it comes to my own financial health and knowledge, knowing the people to go to, like the government, like DORA, who have already done a lot of the work for you. They've done the research to say, here are the tools that work best. Here are the things you can rely on. Here are the ways that you can quickly verify whether something is legitimate. Knowing that we're out there doing that work for people and kind of narrowing down the amount of work they have to do into these little small 5-minute bite-sized pieces can go a long way towards helping people maintain their financial health.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, ladies. This has been a fascinating conversation. Again, you can find more information in the description below. We will have all of these resources out there for you to check out, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.